What you're seeing on your screen right now might not look like the familiar circle of trichromatic hues, however, it is fully trichromatic. In fact, this unusual trichromacy is something that, by all accounts, shouldn't be possible. Yet every single hue plate you see here is designed to be uniquely distinguishable even by red-green dichromats, as if they had normal trichromacy. It's a novel method that can simulate moderately functional trichromatic vision using nothing more than a clever combination of dichromatic colors. So how is it possible to build a functional trichromatic hue circle like this when we only have two dichromatic hues to work with? And how should we understand and interpret these weird and contextually novel color experiences here? Stick around, because in this video I'm going to define this contextually novel color vision enhancing technique and demonstrate how it makes this trichromacy, as unusual as it may seem, possible for dichromats. This video is a part of my series on simulating, understanding and correcting color vision deficiencies. In this series, we already explored a straightforward and the arguably easiest method for digitally simulating most forms of color blindness. We also covered a basic correction technique called daltonization that shifts colors to be more favorable for deficient color discriminability, but it came with a significant trade-off. While it helped separate some confusing colors, it did so at the cost of merging others that were previously distinct. Following the previous demonstration, in this video, I'm going to demonstrate a novel and unprecedented method for functionally correcting severe color vision deficiencies, the three flavors of dichromacy, towards normal trichromacy, with the correction of protanopia, a strong red blindness, as a prime example. I've named this new method color interlacing, and it allows for functional trichromatic color discriminability when only dichromatic colors are available. This new method is effective even for a single eye, without having to disrupt the chromatic redundancy of binocular color vision, because it mimics retinal color mixing through optical color mixing, generating contextually new and uniquely identifiable color experiences in the process. Here's a small recap if you don't feel like watching the previous videos in this series, although I highly recommend it. As I've said, in the following, we're going to use the relatively common dichromacy protanopia, which is a strong red-green color vision deficiency, as a prime example. But the other two possible dichromacies, deuteranopia and tritanopia, as well as all moderate and mild color vision deficiency variations, can be functionally corrected with the same color interlacing method, although through varying combinations of spectra. More on that later. First, we need to get a basic understanding of how trichromacy and dichromacy work. Normal trichromacy operates with three distinct cone types. Each cone type is sensitive to a different range of wavelengths of light and evokes a different unique color quality on its own. There's the S-cone type with a bluish color quality for small wavelength light, the M-cone type with a greenish color quality for medium wavelength light, and the L-cone type with a reddish color quality for long wavelength light. The multitude of possible combinations of differing activation levels of these three cone types based on the available ranges of light determines what colors we are seeing. This is the figurative filter through which most people see the world. Now, a person can become color vision deficient or dichromatic because of a few different anomalies. However, we are going to use the spectral shift of one cone type towards another cone type as a prime example, which causes the two cone types' color qualities to converge towards a single unified color quality the greater their spectral overlap. In normal trichromacy, the M and L cone types are already spectrally very close together. Moreover, both the M and L cone types are genetically relatively unstable compared to the S cone type, which makes each person have variations of these two cone types with slightly different spectral shifts and peaks. Most often these shifts are so minimal that color discriminability isn't impaired. But if you are unlucky enough, one cone type's sensitivity can spectrally shift so much that it strongly overlaps with another cone type. A little bit of spectral overlap can be a good thing, especially because this overlap makes the range of light between two cone types more visible. However, too much overlap effectively reduces color discriminability. For example, in protanopia, the L cone type spectrally shifts very close to the M cone type. Once a critical point of convergence has been reached, the two cone types effectively combine into a single cone type. The result is a severe protonopic color deficiency that's generally as dysfunctional as the dichromacy protonopia, because despite there technically being three cone types, two of them spectrally overlap to such an extent that one of them is rendered useless for color discriminability. The dimensionality of color vision is usually determined by the amount of cone types and their spectral distinctiveness. This means that a trichromat enjoys a roughly three-dimensional color space with optimally up to 16 million colors in a digital RGB color context. Although we have to consider that even a normal trichromat's color space isn't fully 3D yet and more of a 2-point-something D space because of the already relatively strong spectral overlap of the normal trichromatic M and L cone types. In protonopia, there's also the M and L cone types, but they effectively turn into a single cone type for greenish-yellowish light, whom we'll call the ML cone type from now on, plus the normal S cone type for bluish light. Since there effectively are only two cone types, a protonop's color space is only two-dimensional. As a result, a protonop distinguishes fewer colors, and not just a few fewer colors here and there, but literally a whole dimension of fewer colors. Every previously trichromatic color and hue either collapses into a yellow, blue, white or black, or some mixture of these four base colors. Furthermore, while hue in trichromacy is one-dimensional, which means there's a circle of distinct trichromatic hues, hue in dichromacy is zero-dimensional, which means there are only two singular dichromatic hue points, yellow and blue. In this regard, although only one out of three cone types is dysfunctional or missing in dichromacy because the space of color decreases dimensionally with each non-functional deducted cone type, in context the overall quantity and quality of dichromatic colors almost become incomparable to normal trichromatic colors, despite being a subset of them. When comparing the two-dimensional color space of protonopia to the three-dimensional color space of normal trichromacy, it sounds unbelievable that there's actually a way to functionally correct protonopia towards normal trichromacy, and that even in a single eye. After all, there's literally a dimension of color, and thus also a dimension of hue missing. Therefore, in order to understand how to add a functional and distinct third dimension of color to protonopia, in the following I'm going to introduce you to a method of mixing colors that's both old and new, a method that reinvents, recontextualizes and hyperspecializes optical color mixing. This method, called color interlacing, describes the interlacing of two distinct colors to generate so-called interlaced colors, an unusual type of color that can be used to simulate higher color dimensions and consequently also experience contextually novel colors, contrasts and hues. And that with minimal to no prior training, but just an open mind to what a color experience fundamentally can be. The color interlacing method can be understood as an evolution and specific constructive application of the already well-known optical color mixing method. This is because color interlacing exploits optical color mixing to its extremes and contextualizes optically mixed colors specifically for better and higher dimensional color discriminability, thereby diverging from optical color mixing both in the interpretation and application of its unusual color experiences. To understand optical color mixing and color interlacing, you have to remember that color is created in context. Every color in a visual scene has an influence on each other. Sometimes this influence is small, and sometimes it's very noticeable. Especially when colors are put directly next to each other in small patterns, you can start to see that colors can even collapse into a totally different color under the influence of each other. For example, if there's a big yellow square next to a big blue square, both colors elevate each other due to their contrast. However, if it's a very small, tightly packed and uniform pattern of yellow and blue squares, both colors collapse into a single grayish median color, although there's just two narrow ranges and not a whole balanced range of wavelengths present. So when colors are sufficiently big and separated, they reinforce each other. But when they are arranged in a uniformly and small enough pattern, they predictably collapse into their additive or subtractive color mix. Now comes the interesting part. Since this mutual color influence exists on a spectrum, there has to be a sweet spot of spatial adjacency where two colors are so close to each other and so dense that they positively reinforce each other, but still far enough away from each other that they don't collapse into their color mix. This sweet spot can be narrow, and there are a lot of aspects you have to consider. First of all, the viewing distance needs to be fixed, because the further away you are from an interlaced color, the smaller it becomes relative to you, until its two color components eventually collapse. A very close viewing distance is also not optimal, because here the colors gradually leave the sweet spot of spatial adjacency, although they should still kind of work at such a close distance. Furthermore, in the case of this video, you have to watch it in full screen 4K video resolution and at least on a standard full HD PC monitor because of YouTube's video compression and the downsizing of a smaller video display. The recommended distance is roughly an arm's length away from your monitor, plus or minus a few decimeters, depending on how good your visual acuity and how large your screen is. On your mobile phone or a similarly small device, interlaced colors only work when you appropriately zoom in. In that case, finding the sweet spot is a bit difficult because it depends on the specific size of your device's screen. But at least it's doable. Lastly, and most importantly, we have to consider which pattern we are using to spatially allocate the two component colors. This pattern that's encoded in a so-called bicolor texture map cannot be too uniform, because uniformity unfortunately leads to a quicker collapse of the component colors of an interlaced color. But it also cannot be too chaotic, because more chaos results in less spatial resolution, that is worse visual acuity and a loss of detail. The currently best texture map that I've created that combines uniformity and chaos in such a way that both spatial resolution is preserved and color collapse is prevented as much as possible looks like this. Here, the interlaced colors components are easily discernible at an adequate distance. They are close enough together that they can count towards a single color experience, and they don't collapse into their color mix while also maintaining sufficient influence on each other. Here, spatial resolution, although slightly impaired, is still good enough that you can discern most small and important details. This makes interlaced colors a contextually new type of color that combines both texture and color into a single unified concept. Of course, currently I've just more or less explained basic optical color mixing through color dithering, with the added flavor of the sweet spot of spatial adjacency of two colors. But what makes the color interlacing method novel and so useful is the never-before-seen context these optically mixed and specifically dithered colors are used in. As an important side note, in the following applied context, an important and unique aspect of interlaced colors is that, although we're using a bicolor texture map to spatially allocate two colors, color itself remains the sole determinant for color identification. We are not cheating by correlating distinct patterns with specific color and hue categories, for example. Rather, it is always color that's being used to identify the color of an object. This might sound trivial, but this aspect of interlaced colors is critical because it makes them feel like actual colors instead of merely patterns that have been overlaid on top of colors. Now that we theoretically understand interlaced colors, we can use them in practice to functionally simulate trichromatic colors and hues when only dichromatic colors are available, for both red-green dichromats and normal trichromats. I am going to start by showing you the Hue Circle of this novel type of trichromacy that's generated through interlacing dichromatic colors once again, the same one you've already seen at the beginning of this video. First, that long term is a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? So let's give this emergent trichromatic system a more practical name. Let's call it Proto-Trichromacy for short from now on, with color interlacing presupposed in this video, and proto being an abbreviation and indication of protanopia. Incidentally, this Proto-Trichromacy also works identically well as a deuterotrichromacy, that is for correcting deuteranopia towards normal trichromacy. Pause the video if you like and observe these novel hues in detail. Try to make sense of them first, and then I'll explain how to understand them. Okay, first of all, we need to understand what a hue actually is, to make any sense of the proto-trichromatic hue circle. Because hue is a fundamental component of color, any increase in its dimensionality automatically results in a corresponding expansion of the overall color space. Essentially, as color vision becomes more complex with each additional functional and distinct cone type, it's mainly the dimension of hue that expands. For example, black and white remain fundamental anchors, but the space of whitish and blackish color mixes simply grows to accommodate the new hues. So, regardless of its complexity, every form of color vision shares a single axis from perceptual white to black. Hue itself is a quality of color that allows us to intuitively disassemble various combinations of wavelengths to see which cone types are being stimulated the most and to which relative extent. Therefore, hue is an imbalance in the relative activation of the existing cone types. For a color to be perceived as a distinct, saturated and bright hue, two conditions must be met within the natural limits of your vision. At least one cone type must be firing at its maximum potential, while at least one other is minimally active. Proto-Trichromacy doesn't generate a new primary color from scratch, unfortunately. Instead, it uses a rather ingenious method that simulates the presence of a virtual third primary color in context. In fact, Proto-Trichromacy functionally simulates trichromatic vision by carefully interlacing two specifically engineered dichromatic spectra. Fortunately for dichromats, there are just enough unique colors in any dichromacy that we can replicate the effect of a third primary as well as a distinct trichromatic hue circle and color space with this combinatory approach, and that without any metameric, that is identically looking and repeating colors. The logic for this becomes clear when we apply our previous definition of hue to these proto-trichromatic hues. According to the rulebook we established for what makes a hue, as long as the first ingredient, the base color, is as bright and saturated as possible, it doesn't matter what the second ingredient is. And in the context of proto-trichromacy, we have three primary colors to work with, although one of which is virtual. The combination of the base and the additive can always be treated by the brain as a distinct hue, simply because that vibrant base color guarantees the necessary imbalance, while one other real or virtual primary is minimally active. We can prove that proto-trichromatic hues are genuine trichromatic hues with a simple test. As you can see, every single one of them can smoothly fade to perceptual white when desaturated, and they perfectly respond to changes in brightness. As mundane as this sounds, this is a fundamental breakthrough because in standard protanopia, this is not possible. The difference becomes obvious when you compare the protanopic and proto-trichromatic hue circles side by side. The protanopic hue circle is highly repetitive and metameric. As you move towards red, the colors are just yellow and blue getting darker. Towards cyan, it's the same two hues getting lighter. And in between, there are even a few highly confusable hue plates that look identically yellow or blue. In stark contrast, every plate in the proto-trichromatic hue circle has a unique, distinguishable hue. This is a monumental improvement. It means that a person with protanopia, who normally couldn't differentiate and only partially logically arranged these trichromatic hues based on luminance and saturation cues, can now learn to do so with proto-trichromacy, effectively organizing the trichromatic hue circle as if they had normal trichromatic vision. Crucially, the perception of color in proto-trichromacy is defined exclusively by color information, with no influence from texture or patterns, again because the determinant for color identification is purely of chromatic nature. Your brain is encouraged to contextually see these interlaced colors as actual color experiences, preventing the effect from degrading into a mere visual texture or pattern overlay, despite the noisy nature of interlaced colors. Of course, it naturally takes some training to proficiently organize and correctly identify these proto-trichromatic hues, but this is a quickly learnable skill. With this color interlacing method, dichromats now have a powerful tool at hand to logically make sense of trichromatic colors and experience them in their own unique way. Now, these proto-trichromatic hues weren't chosen randomly, of course. They were engineered with several crucial criteria in mind. Not only must a proto-trichromatic hue conform to the technical definition of a hue, but its overall character, including its contrast, saturation and luminance, has to closely mirror the experience of normal trichromatic vision. This makes them functionally and perceptually as similar as possible to the real thing. With respect to how we perceive hues in normal trichromatic vision, they aren't all created equal. Yellow, for instance, is naturally bright and close to white, much like cyan. Blue, on the other hand, is deep and dark, while red is vibrant but not as bright as green. Replicating these individual saturation and brightness characteristics is just the first step. We also have to get the contrasts of these hues right. On a hue circle, red needs to feel and look like the natural opposite of cyan, green the opposite of magenta, blue the opposite of yellow, and so on, with each hue as contrasting as possible to its opposite on the hue circle. Finally, we even have to account for how well or bad normal trichromats can distinguish trichromatic hues in the first place. For example, our eyes are much better at telling the difference between orange and red hues than they are at distinguishing between green and lime hues. This is because the cone types of normal trichromats also have significant overlaps in some spectral regions, naturally leading to worse hue discriminability the greater the overlap. A truly effective trichromacy mimicking system has to replicate all of these perceptual peculiarities of normal trichromatic hues. The proto-trichromatic hues you see here are designed to account for all of these complex visual rules, balanced as closely as possible within the limits of the available protonopic colors and their combinations. As you can see, each proto-trichromatic hue has a perfect contrast on the opposite side of the hue circle. Red, which is a black-yellow, is strongly contrasted by cyan, that's a blue-white. Green, which is a blue-yellow, is sufficiently contrasted by a magenta, that's a black-white. And blue, which is a black-blue, is strongly contrasted by a yellow, that's a yellow-white. Here, reddish hues are towards black-yellow. Orange hues are towards pure yellow, yellowish hues are towards yellow-white. Greenish hues are towards yellow-blue, cyanish hues are towards white-blue, cobaltish hues are towards pure blue, bluish hues are towards black-blue, purplish hues are towards black-light blue, magenta-ish hues are towards black-whitish, and lastly, pinkish hues are towards black-light yellow. White and black, on the other hand, stay pure. All of these color combinations are carefully selected to match the look and feel of normal trichromatic colors as closely as possible, in hue discriminability, saturation, luminance, and contrast. Of course, as much as I've praised Proto-Trichromacy so far, it naturally also has its flaws. Many of them are unavoidable, unfortunately. As I've mentioned before, due to how interlaced colors are constructed, you're losing some visual acuity and spatial resolution. This means that the smaller fine details become, for example, text, the more difficult it is to decipher and distinguish them. Not only that, the proto-trichromatic colors themselves are lower in resolution and need more space to be perceivable, which means that not only is a bit of spatial resolution lost for visual elements at such small scales, but you are also having a harder time distinguishing the colors. Fortunately, however, this is a relatively infrequent problem, because most visual elements have a large enough size, and whenever there's ambiguity, you can often just zoom in to make the visuals larger and the colors easier to identify. Moreover, a few proto-trichromatic contrasts are not as contrasty as in normal trichromacy, although it's the best we can do with the available dichromatic color combinations. As the most extreme example, although magenta with its black-white hue and green with its yellow-blue hue are maximally contrasting in theory. In practice, they sometimes look alike at a glance because when interlaced, yellow and blue collapse and additively mix into the same grayish color as black and white. When you're not at the optimal viewing distance from the screen or your vision isn't focused. This ambiguity isn't something you'll notice that often, but you have to be aware of it to correctly interpret proto-trichromatic colors. And the last consideration is that currently these proto-trichromatic colors are only available in a digital context and only experienceable through the custom color vision application that I've developed for Windows 10 and 11. So you're bound to your PC whenever you want to work with and experience Proto-Trichromacy. This limitation is reasonable given the constructive complexity of interlaced colors. Yet, all of these flaws pale in comparison to what this Proto-Trichromacy allows you to do. Finally, since I've kept you long enough in suspense, we are moving on to how these proto-trichromatic colors look in context. The following are just a few samples that should encourage you to play around and explore proto-deutero and trito-trichromatic colors for yourself with my custom color vision application. We are going to do a short online color vision deficiency test first, then look at a few images to see how they transform through this proto-trichromacy and its contrasts. And lastly, we'll see how these proto-trichromatic colors enhance the experience of a visually complex and colorful game like Minecraft. First of all, doing a colorblind test becomes really easy. Not only can you see and differentiate all the numbers, a task you can technically also accomplish with a simple daltonization approach, but you can also correctly identify the colors and hues now if you look closely and have memorized which proto-trichromatic hue maps to which normal trichromatic hue. No matter how often you do this test, you should always be able to ace it. An unaided red-green dichromat distinguishes little to no numbers on at least a third of these test plates, but with this proto-trichromacy, number identification and color discriminability is almost as easy and good as if they had a trichromatic vision. Next, as image examples, a quick look through Google's image search with the adjective term red-green color reveals incredible contrasts and colors. Especially compared to the protonopic variants, the proto-trichromatic images reveal previously impossible trichromatic details. You have to get a bit used to the static noise of the texture map, but once you do, you won't even notice it anymore. And as another image example that shows how well proto-trichromacy augments previously identically looking metameric colors. Here's an image where the top and bottom row red-greenish squares should look almost identical in protanopia, but are easily distinguishable with proto-trichromacy. The same augmentation happens for other metameric colors also, like in these red-bluish squares that you can see here. As the last example, a game like Minecraft also transforms completely through proto-trichromatic eyes. In fact, I'd say it isn't even comparable to what you'd see with unaided protanopia. At least that's what it looks like to my trained eyes. There are so many more intense and interesting contrasts, so much more color details to be discovered. And I notice so many more things that I don't and can't with the protanopia simulation. The usual blandness is gone and replaced by the novel and rich contrasts of proto-trichromacy. These few examples should have demonstrated pretty well that I'm not overselling interlaced colors and proto-trichromacy. So, while walking through Minecraft with this unusual color vision, let's address the reasonable concerns some of you might rightfully have. I get that for some of you, these interlaced colors might not immediately look like contextually novel colors. After all, your brain needs some time to adjust and rewire, so be patient with it. For anyone still skeptical about whether these are real colors, I urge you to reconsider what defines color itself. If this system allows a protonop to functionally pass colorblind tests and perfectly arrange a trichromatic hue circle using only color information, just like a trichromat, then the subjective quality of the color experience becomes secondary. The ability to discriminate between colors is far more important than the subjective nature of that color. In essence, the feeling or qualia of color is personal and immeasurable, but color discriminability is objective and measurable. Proto-trichromacy offers both, close to full trichromatic discriminability and contextually novel color experiences with only a few small caveats. My advice is to give it a genuine try. Use it for a few days, or even better, a few weeks. Experience it in as many different situations and contexts as possible, and then decide for yourself once you've seen what it can do. This color interlacing system and proto-trichromacy is a functional tool for your color vision. If it enables you to perform tasks that require trichromatic vision, then it has succeeded. It's a different, yet undoubtedly trichromatic way to understand and see color. Lastly, if you're interested in interlaced colors and want to play around with them, I can only recommend the application I've developed that I fittingly named Custom Color Vision. It allows you to easily integrate customized interlaced colors and, for example, the Proto-Trichromacy of this video into your digital color vision. Custom Color Vision is a great and currently the only tool that allows you to play around with and learn to differentiate interlaced colors in real time, among many other functionalities. If you want to support me and get a valuable product in return, you can open the video description and find a link to my app Custom Color Vision there. Also, don't forget to support me and my channel by liking and subscribing if you haven't already. I am Oogway, and I will show you how to reshape and enhance your sensory experiences, because it is nothing but our senses that connect us to this world. Have fun watching and learning all these amazing colors. Thanks for watching.